It was the end of my freshman year of college, so my friend and I spent a weekend at my family's cabin. The weekend was fairly uneventful. The most exciting things to happen involved burning a pizza on the grill and a chipmunk trying to join me while I was using the outhouse. But then we had to leave. Even though I had gone to the cabin every summer since I was born, I didn't really know how to get to and from it. We had been using my friend's dad's GPS. It was pretty old, and probably hadn't been updated in a while, which is likely why it took us where it did. The route we took was unfamiliar to me, but what did I know? It was a GPS, and I trusted it. It took us down a twisted side road that I knew was wrong, but I kept going, thinking that maybe going through the woods would be faster, that it was a shortcut. That's when it told me to take a left. I obeyed, but I was extremely confused, because it looked like a dirt road. I slowed down to look at the GPS, when my friend said, "Oh my God." I looked up, and realized we were not on a road at all. We were in someone's driveway. Then I saw the dolls. They were worn by the weather, full of dirt and faded from the sun. The ones I took note of were the clowns and the bodiless heads. There were so many I wasn't able to take them all in, and every single doll was hanging from a tree. My friend and I were both shrieking at this point, her yelling at me to back up and get out of there, and me yelling, "What the fuck," over and over. We safely got back to the main road, and followed that until the GPS gave us a different route, which took us home without further incident. Although I didn't see the person living in that run-down house, it was one of the most terrifying things that has happened to me. I felt like I had been dropped in the middle of a horror movie about a serial killer with a doll fetish or something. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the person living there had been there when we pulled up to their house. But I try not to let my imagination get the best of me. Whoever is responsible for that house, let's not meet. This isn't a story that happened to me, but to my godmother. For decades, the Santa Cruz Mountains in Northern California have been rumored to attract paranormal visitors and hold mysterious energies, etc. The range is pretty large, and there are tiny towns and hotels scattered throughout. My mother and I used to live in the city of Santa Cruz, so we weren't very close to them, but we could drive up on occasion to enjoy the peaceful scenery, although the whole area is beautiful. There's an odd distinction between where locals go and tourists do. It's not just that the tourists go to the hotels and locals stick to the hiking trails, but there are certain individual regions in the range that most locals avoid. I actually tried to talk to some people about it, but they would always just blow it off or change the topic. It was weird. Anyways, my godmother decided that she was going to rent a little cabin in the woods and get away for a week. She'd gone through a bad breakup and wanted to enjoy the woods. My mother and I sent her off, not expecting to see her for at least 7 days. However, the next morning we awoke to her pounding on our door. My godmother has always been a strong woman, and she's definitely open to supernatural or inexplicable things, but she firmly believed that most supernatural entities or things were benign or even good. Her evening in the Santa Cruz Mountains changed her mind. Apparently, the cabin she rented was in one of the thicker, darker parts of the forest. Not many people ventured out there. She settled down for sleep and noticed that even though she had built a small fire in the fireplace hours before, it was burning quite intensely. She assumed it had something to do with the logs or good fireplace ventilation and went to sleep. Around 3 or so in the morning, she awoke pretty slowly. She felt a bit strange, like something wasn't right. Then she saw them, at the foot of her bed. 2 figures, one female and one male. They just stood there staring at her. They were very dark, but it seemed like the female had a white dress on. She just stared back at them, like they were sizing each other up. She remembers rubbing her face and trying to sit up like she was in a dream, but the figures remained at the foot of her bed, no matter what. She says she wasn't too scared until she met their eyes. Glowing from dark grayish skin, these figures had pulsing orange eyes. Behind them in the fireplace, the fire was blazing, like someone had poured gas on it. She suddenly felt very heavy and very sick, as a sense of dread filled her. As quickly as she could, she grabbed her coat and sprinted out of the cabin. She ran all the way down the mountain until she found a hotel and called a taxi. She never went back in those woods again. There's definitely some weird stuff that goes on in those mountains. My parents once stumbled upon a group performing what looked like a dark ritual, with people dancing in gray hoods around an inverted cross set on fire. And they found slaughtered animals with symbols carved into their bodies on certain trails. Does anyone have a similar experience in the Santa Cruz Mountains? I'm curious to investigate, but not sure if I want to go in there alone now. I've never really been a believer in the paranormal, and I always try to find a rational explanation for things, at least until last summer. Originally from New Jersey, I decided to take my wife and kids for a vacation. We went to visit my in-laws, who have a cabin in the Canadian Rockies. For the first few days, we enjoyed the peace and tranquility of the country, and went on a bunch of hikes and bike rides in the forest around the cabin, during which I didn't see anything out of the ordinary in what must have been a 20-mile radius around the home. The cabin is pretty old and runs on a separate generator near the tool shed in the back of the yard, which my father-in-law says has always been temperamental and can create an eerie atmosphere when the lights flicker on and off. So I know better than to be spooked by shadows and bumps in the night. However, one night, around 10 p.m., we were sitting around about to go to bed when the lights completely gave out, and the pitch blackness of the countryside meant that we could see literally nothing. Before I could grab the flashlight, I heard rustling outside the cabin, and something brushed against the living room wall. I tried to put on a brave face for my kids, and told them that it was probably a coyote, and they should just go to their room. But from the noises it made, it sounded bipedal. Pretty creeped out, I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to the generator, shining the light on the ground to find my way. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something which terrified me so much, I don't even know if I can find the right words to describe it. I couldn't make it out exactly. All I could see was a creature in my peripheral vision. It looked human, about 6 feet tall, with ghost white skin. I knew it was staring at me. At this point, I was mustering up the courage to look at it. And when I shined the torch at it, I got a good look at the monster. It's so difficult to portray with words, but it looked like a man, whose skin was too tight for his body. You could see all of his organs bulging through his skin, and the bones made it look almost like an insect. But what jolted me the most was the fact that it had no face whatsoever, but still had indentations where the eyes should be. The bright light startled the creature, and it hunched over as if about to run. This was all I could see in the brief glimpse I got before I dropped the flashlight in fear, and by the time I picked it up, it had darted into the forest. I ran to the back of the cabin and stayed there for what seemed like forever, making sure it was gone before I went back to the generator. When I went back inside, I didn't tell anyone, and I don't really know why. I suppose to protect the children, and just in case my wife didn't believe me. About a week afterwards, I had this recurring nightmare. I would dream about that night, and wake up in a cold sweat, until I finally confessed everything to my wife, and started seeing a therapist to help me with my sleeping. I'd love to hear any stories about any people who think they've seen what I saw. Many years ago, when I was about 13 years old, I was active in the Boy Scouts. One August weekend, we had traveled to a state park in West Virginia. This trip would have been the first time for most of us to have gone spelunking, including the adults. There was a general mix of anxiety and excitement in each of us, as we had little idea as to what to expect. We arrived on Friday evening. For dinner, we quickly boiled hot dogs, scarfing them down so we could fish as the water cooled for the night. If memory serves me correct, there was a little lake within view of our campground. We stayed there for a few hours, using a variety of lures and methods, to no avail. When it got to be about 11:30, my best friend Seth and I decided we were going to get up early to fish a bit more. See, we were staying at that campground in West Virginia, but we would get in a car the next day to travel to Ohio to the caves. If we were to wake up early, we could buy more time to do what we wanted to do, catch some trout. Not only that, neither of us had a fishing license, so if we were to get up early, then none of the adults would be able to stop us. Win-win. At 3 a.m., my watch alarm beeps, waking me up. I didn't care that I'd only slept 3 hours. I felt invigorated. I woke Seth up. We silently gathered our fishing equipment, slipped on our boots, and headed out. The night was clear and cool. We didn't need to bring flashlights, as the full moon provided enough glow to easily navigate our way. We started walking at the lake, and followed the conjoining creek upstream in hopes of finding a shallower area, even past a fence that noted that we were on private property. We were kids, and had little reason to care. We continued to walk in silence for a couple miles. As we walked, the trees and brush thickened. We expected as much, as we had seen a map of the area, and there were no roads or trails that ran out here. We were completely immersed in nature, or so we thought, until we ran into a cabin in the woods. The cabin was relatively small, maybe 12 by 12 feet. It was constructed out of pale cinder block. I would have assumed that it was a storage facility of some kind, if not for one major detail that stuck out. On the side facing us, there was a frosted window, and through it, the pale blue light of a television glared. I whispered to Seth that the person must have fallen asleep watching TV. I mean, it was the most logical conclusion, right? I know it's common for rural people to rise early, but 4 a.m.? We stepped lightly as we passed it, but I stopped dead in my tracks. The resident of the cabin was standing in the window, staring at us. We could not make out his face through the frosted glass, but we didn't need to. We refused to move, as the chances of the individual being able to see us clearly were low. Hopefully he would think it was an animal, and go back to watching TV and probably sipping on his beer. But he never sat down. He definitely saw us. As this guy was staring at two kids through the window, thoughts began to race through our minds. What would he do to us? Why was he up at 4 a.m. to begin with? Was he even the real resident of this cabin? Or just hiding out, as there were no roads around? The answer to these questions did not matter. All that mattered was the fact that this guy was continuing to stare at us, two frozen 13-year-olds alone in the woods. My heart was pounding hard, yet I remained still. I shut my eyes and focused everything I had on remaining perfectly statue-like. I breathed in my nose and out my mouth, in my nose and out my mouth. This went on for like 10 minutes. And all of a sudden I realized I was going to sneeze. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, in hopes of suppressing it, but I could not. I sneezed, and the guy in the window sneezed. It wasn't a window, it was a square sign, and that wasn't a TV. It was a reflection of the moonlight. It wasn't someone staring at us, it was my silhouette. This was the most petrified I've been in my life. Turns out, I was scared of my own shadow. This happened to my mother a few weeks ago, and as she is computer illiterate, I feel I need to share this incredibly creepy story. Our house is a log cabin in the middle of farm country in central PA. On our entire 2-mile street, there are only 10 houses, and only one neighbor that you can actually see from the house. We don't even have keys for the doors, because they haven't been locked in 20 plus years. I was home visiting, and noticed that the front door was locked. Well, ever since Bicycle Man, I lock it at night, my mom said, and that's how I heard the story. 3 weeks ago, the beagle woke my mom up around 3 a.m. because he needed to go out. She walked him to the front door, snapped the lead on his collar, and let him out. She stood by the glass screen door with the front porch light on, waiting for him to finish his business. All of a sudden, he starts howling and strains until the leash pulls taut. Just out of the ring of light on the street, my mother sees a man riding up the road on a compact bicycle. He's going a slow, steady speed. He disappears from view, but the dog continues to freak out. This is bizarre enough. The house is miles from anything, and it has extremely steep hills in either direction on the road. It's not the sort of place you ever see anyone taking a bike ride. But then, the creep factor came into play. A few moments later, he rides back down the road, past the house, and then pulls into the yard, just out of reach of the dog. This time, he's in the light, and my mother can see clearly that he's wearing gloves and a full ski mask. She's inside behind the glass door, but she says she thought he might have been trying to say something. She was in shock though, kind of frozen in fear, and the last thing she wanted to do was open the door to hear better. He stood in the yard, and they just stared at each other for a few solid minutes. Then he just turned and left. Hopefully, she and Bicycle Man never meet again. One night I was hanging out with my aunt and uncle when they randomly asked me if I believe in Bigfoot. I said I do not, but I had an experience I certainly can't explain away. My buddy and I were passing through rural McKean County, Pennsylvania, after spending time in my family's hunting cabin in neighboring Potter County. I was telling my buddy about McKean County's main tourist draw, the Kinzua Bridge, once the world's tallest railroad bridge. Sadly, a few years ago, the bridge was felled in the middle of the night by a tornado, ripping apart its midsection and leaving only the portions of the bridge anchored into the hillside standing. On the valley floor are rusted, contorted steel beams, some reaching dozens of feet into the air. Even though it was fast approaching midnight, my friend wanted to do some good old-fashioned trespassing to check it out. So did I. It being late at night and in the middle of nowhere, there wasn't a soul around. We hopped over their laughable security apparatus, a rented chain-link fence that wouldn't deter an 8-year-old. It's close to a full moon, and we're now 100 feet or so above the valley floor, on what's left of the former monolith. We're doing the stupid teenage young 20s BS us guys do, leaning over the edge where there used to be hundreds more feet of track, spitting off it, you know, all the prerequisites. After we grew bored of that, we began to rip off chunks of railroad ties. It was scary how easy it was to do this to something that had very recently had trains running on it. Naturally, the only course of action was to throw these huge chunks of wood off the bridge and make some noise. So we were chucking them off and listening to them smash into the ground. But oh my Lord God Jesus, the sound, the scream that came right after that will forever stick out in my mind. Outside of it being incredibly loud and urine-inducing, the best I can do is tell you it sounded half primate and half industrial machinery, like metal screeching while hydraulics hiss. Then, whatever it is we spooked or pissed off starts sprinting away through the forest below. Mind you, It was a full moon, and at that hour, we had good illumination. We could see sizable trees bending at absurd angles by something with an insane amount of size, weight, and strength. Even its footsteps made a ruckus, among its primate-like grunts. We weren't lucky enough to catch a glimpse of the beast through the dense forest canopy. Listen, I've seen a handful of black bear running in the wild. None of them made anywhere near that much noise while sprinting away. I was fortunate enough to visit South Africa once and saw a rhino sprinting through the safari just a few feet away from our Jeep. Again, I say, a rhino sprinting didn't even come remotely close to making that much noise. Nothing compares. Whatever it was has to be colossal. When I got back to my home in central Ohio, I scoured the net for recordings of bear and mountain lion calls. Nope, nothing sounded like the scream we heard. I have yet to hear anything like it on the dozens of animal documentaries I've watched, or handful of remote camping trips. Once I concluded my story, my aunt and uncle's jaws were on the floor. I asked them what was up. As it turns out, there was some Bigfoot show that they had just seen an episode of that took place at the Kinzua Bridge. So again, I don't believe in Bigfoot. No authenticated prints, droppings, or dead bodies. The odds of something that size not leaving a conclusive trace of evidence has to be next to impossible. Is it more likely that my friend and I shared in a delusion? I guess that's more likely, but we were not tired, impaired, or scared until we heard that thing. I'll never forget it. I want a rational explanation, but almost 10 years later, I've found absolutely nothing. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story, or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. So I got some good news. I officially have a sidekick. Go ahead and introduce yourself, dude. So I figured it'd be nice to have a sidekick, you know? Exactly. A solid guy who could hit me with a few laughs. Okay, hold on a little bit, dude. I haven't said anything yet. So we're gonna give this a shot and see if it works out.
아, 된장찌개 시켰는데 왜 된장찌개가 빨갛지?
Huh? What the hell? You're crazy, man. Alright, you wanna laugh? You wanna fucking laugh? Alright, what did the cannibal do after he dumped his girlfriend? He wiped. Wow, you made me look like a real dickhead right there.
오뎅 이거 서비스로 줬나 보다.
I have no idea what you're saying.
와, 여기 오뎅 들어있네.
I don't know, dude, maybe. Maybe I didn't really think this through. Anyways, be good to animals, even people. So.
Ja, snämmar, bärksbus, hrish.
Or who have had any experience getting over an encounter with the paranormal. Or who have had an... Or who have had any experience... Or who have had... Or who have... Are you kidding me? Every time I'm going to talk, you're going to do it. Don't trust a big butt and a smile that poison. Yeah. The mellow hits with your host, The Devil's Interval. And the pitch blackness of the countryside meant that we could... And the pitch blackness of the countryside meant that we could see... Motherfucker.